"This is a man's work, madam," said the Duke of Hollingsey, tapping the report in his hand, "and I will thank you not to interrupt while men are doing it." The young woman standing at the end of the long table did not move. Julian Caro, 5th Duke of Hollingsey, went back to the page. He had been reading it for 2 hours, and it had put him in the strangest humor of his life, half exhilaration and half fury, because it was, without any question at all, the best piece of work he had seen in 15 years of trying to keep the sea out of his county. 11,000 acres of the Hollingsey levels lay below the tide line. They had lain there since the conquest, kept dry by a sea wall that his grandfather had built badly and his father had patched worse, and in the great tide of the year 11 the wall had gone at Gull Reach and drowned 400 acres of wheat and 11 cottages and, in the end, 2 men. Julian had spent 4 years and £19,000 since then having engineers tell him what to do about it, and every one of them had told him to build the wall higher, and he had known in his bones, in the part of him that had walked those marshes since he could walk at all, that they were wrong and had not been able to say why. And now here was a report, 41 pages of it, submitted through a firm of surveyors in Bristol under the name H. Fenn, which said, in a small, dry, faintly amused hand, that building the wall higher was the surest way to lose the levels altogether. "The sea is not an enemy to be walled out," it said. "It is a tenant to be given a room. Raise Gull Reach and you will merely move the breach to Coran Point, where the wall is older. Raise Coran and it will go at the sluice. Every foot you add to the wall adds a foot of head to the water behind it, and the water is patient, and you are not." Instead, it proposed a thing no engineer had proposed to him in 4 years, to give up 80 acres, deliberately on purpose, by design, at a place called Redmire Flat, which was poor grazing and had never grown anything but rushes, and let the tide in, a relief basin, a room for the sea. 60 pages of levels and tide tables and calculations of volume, and a cost of £4,100, and a sentence at the end that Julian had now read 9 times. "Gull Reach will hold, my lord, not because it is made stronger, but because it is no longer asked to do the impossible." Men and walls fail for the same reason. He had summoned the surveyors from Bristol. He had summoned them to Hollingsey Court on 3 days' notice with a curtness he was not proud of, because he wanted to look the man in the eye who had written that sentence. And Bristol had sent him 2 clerks, an elderly partner named Prewitt, and a young woman in a bottle-green pelisse who had said, 40 minutes into a meeting in which she had not been introduced and had not been offered a chair, "My lord, forgive me, the figure on page 19 is being misread. The 4,000 is not the cost of the basin, it is the cost of the basin and the sluice gates together, and if you strike out the gates you will have spent £3,000 on a hole in the ground." At which the Duke of Hollingsey, who had not slept, and who did not like being corrected in his own library, had said the thing about a man's work. The silence that followed it had a texture he could feel on his skin. Old Prewitt was scarlet. The 2 clerks were studying the carpet. And the young woman in the bottle-green pelisse said, quite pleasantly, "Yes, my lord. Then may I suggest that a man do it, and quickly, before the March tides. There are 11 cottages at Gull Reach, and I am told they were rebuilt in the same place." Julian's head came up. "I beg your pardon?" "The cottages, my lord. They were rebuilt on the same ground 4 feet lower than the road, and there are—" She consulted nothing. She had it by heart. 41 people living in them, of whom 9 are over 60. "The wall at Gull Reach is 19 years old, and the wall at Coran is 140. Your engineers propose to raise Gull Reach by 5 feet. A pause. "In February, my lord, at the spring tide with an easterly, the water at Coran Point will stand within 8 inches of the coping. I have measured it. I stood in it." There was a very long silence in the library at Hollingsey Court. "You stood in it," Julian repeated. "In November, it came to here." She indicated, without embarrassment, a point some way above her knee. "It was extremely cold, my lord, and I do not recommend it. And I would not have done it if any of the gentlemen who wrote your other 4 reports had troubled to do it first." She met his eyes. They did their levels from the road. Julian Caro looked at her. She was perhaps 26. The pelisse was good and had been turned. He could see the seam. She had a clever, sharp-boned, unbeautiful face and a great deal of dark hair badly disciplined by pins, And her boots, he looked, because he had learned to look at boots. Her boots were the boots of somebody who walked. Not a lady's boots, not new, cracked across the toe where they had been wet and dried too near a fire. Mr. Pruitt, he said, without taking his eyes off her, who is this? Pruitt made a small strangled noise. My lord, this is Miss Fenn. Miss Hester Fenn. She is, that is to say, she has been of the greatest assistance in the preparation of the. She is my clerk, said Pruitt's junior partner, a smooth young man called Rowe, who had done all the talking for 40 minutes and had not once been right. A very superior sort of clerk. She copies fair, my lord, and she has a head for figures, and Mr. Pruitt indulges her. She should not have spoken. No, said Julian slowly. She should not. He watched the young woman's chin come up a half-inch and her face close like a door. She should have spoken 40 minutes ago, said the Duke of Hollingseer, and I should not have needed to be told twice. He turned the report over and looked at the fair copy on the flyleaf, the small dry hand, and then at the penciled working in the margins of page 19, and then, deliberately, at the ink on the first finger of her right hand. Mr. wrote this. Rowe smiled comfortably. The firm, my lord. It is a firm's work. Mr. Pruitt directed it, and I. Mr. Pruitt, said Julian, is 71 years old and did not know what was on page 19 when I put it in front of him half an hour ago. And you, sir, told me not 10 minutes since that we might economize by leaving out the sluice gates, which the report describes on page 22 as the whole of the mechanism and the entire point of the work, so I think we may agree that you did not write it either. He set the pages down. Miss Fenn, do me the honor of sitting down. Nobody moved. Miss Fenn, said Julian, and pulled out the chair at his own right hand himself, because there was not a servant in the room and he found he was not prepared to wait for one. I have been unforgivably rude to you, in my own house, in front of your employers, and I have no defense at all except the truth, which is that I have read your report 4 times since Tuesday, and I could not put it down, and I did not sleep. And I came into this room this morning in a very bad temper indeed, because I was expecting to meet the finest engineering mind in England, and instead I was being talked at by Mr. Rowe. He inclined his head. Sit down, madam, and tell me about the water at Coron Point. Hester Fenn stood at the end of the long table. My lord, she said, if I sit down in that chair, Mr. Rowe will dismiss me on Friday. Mr. Rowe, said Julian, without looking at him, will do nothing of the kind, because I am about to give this firm a commission worth £4,000, and it will be conditional upon your continued employment, and upon your name appearing on every page of every report that comes out of it. Is that understood, Mr. Rowe? Rowe's mouth opened and shut. And if it is not, Julian added, I shall engage Miss Fenn directly, and Bristol may whistle for its £4,000. I am told I am a difficult man to do business with. It is the one thing they say of me that is entirely true. Hester Fenn sat down. She did it slowly, and she did it with her back very straight, and Julian saw, because he was watching, because he could not stop watching, that her hands were shaking, and that she folded them in her lap so that no one else should see it. Now, Coron Point. She talked for an hour and 40 minutes. She talked about tide tables and wind set, and the difference in the fall of a spring tide with an easterly behind it, and about the sluice at Marrow Dyke, that had been built backwards in 1748, and had been quietly ruining the drainage of 6 farms ever since, and about the depth of blue clay under Redmire Flat, which she had established by driving a rod into it herself in the rain, because the firm would not pay for a boring. She had a piece of chalk, and she used the library table like a slate, and did not once ask his leave. She was not deferential, and she was not apologetic. Twice she said, No, my lord, that is wrong, and I will show you why. And both times she showed him, and both times she was right. And Julian Carew, who had been called the coldest man in 3 counties and had rather enjoyed it, sat at his own table with his chin in his hand, and watched a woman in a turned pelisse take his entire estate apart and put it back together, and felt something happening to him that he could only compare, with a certain alarm, to the tide coming in. At 2:30 she stopped, and looked at the chalk in her hand, and then at the table which was covered in it, and went scarlet for the first time that day. My lord, she said, your table. Damn the table, said the Duke of Hollingsea. Then, after a moment, I beg your pardon. That was unpardonable. It was, Hester Fenn agreed gravely. But you have been agreeing with me for 40 minutes, my lord, and I find I am inclined to be lenient. He gave the commission. He gave it in writing that afternoon, with her name in it in 3 places, and he watched Roe sign the articles with the face of a man swallowing a live wasp, and enjoyed it more than he had enjoyed anything in some years. Then the work began, and Julian Carew discovered that he had let something into his life that he had no idea how to get out again. She came down to Hollingsea in January and lodged at the Anchor in the village, at her own expense, because she would not take his money for it. She was on the marsh at first light, and she was on it at dusk. She wore an old brown habit and men's boots and a shawl, and within a fortnight the whole of Gull Reach knew her by sight and called her Miss Fenn to her face, and a great many worse things behind her back. Because there is nothing an English navvy resents more deeply than being told his levels are out by a woman, unless it is being told so correctly. Julian rode down every day. He told himself it was to superintend. You are in my light, my lord, she said on the 3rd morning, without looking up from the theodolite. I am the landlord. You are 6 feet 2 inches of landlord, said Hester Fenn, standing directly between me and the staff, and I have been trying to read the same figure for 4 minutes. Move, my lord, or I shall be obliged to be uncivil, and it is only Tuesday. He moved. He also laughed out loud, which startled a curlew off the mud and startled his own gamekeeper considerably more, because the Duke of Hollingsea had not been heard to laugh on that marsh since his father died. They quarrelled constantly. It became, quite quickly, the best part of his day. They quarrelled about the cut at Red Mire, and about whether the spoil should be barrowed or carted, and about the wages of the men, which she said were 6pence a day too low, and he said were the rate. And she said the rate was set by men who had never dug a yard of clay in February, and he raised them the 6pence and did not tell her, and she found out inside a week and was furious with him for not telling her, which he had entirely failed to anticipate. You wanted the 6pence. I wanted the 6pence to have been argued for, said Hester, standing in the mud with her hair coming down, and won and written in the book, so that the next man who takes this contract cannot cut it back. You have given them a gift, my lord. A gift can be taken away. I wanted them to have a right. Julian Carew stood in the mud of Red Mire Flat and looked at her. Do you know, he said, that in 15 years nobody has ever explained to me the difference between those 2 things. Then you have been very badly served, my lord, said Hester Fenn, by everyone who has ever taken your money. He put it in the book. She watched him do it. She dined at the court twice a week after that, because it was absurd for her to walk 2 miles back to the Anchor in the dark. And because his aunt Lady Maud, who lived in the East Wing and missed nothing, had declared it was not decent for a young woman to be at the mercy of the Anchor's cook, and had installed herself as chaperon with an alacrity that Julian found suspicious. Lady Maud adored her within one evening. She contradicted you 11 times at dinner, she said afterwards, with great satisfaction, prodding the fire. 11, Julian, I counted. Your mother never contradicted your father once in 26 years, and they were both perfectly miserable. She is an engineer, aunt. She is a woman, you great oak, and she is the first one who has ever set foot in this house who was not either frightened of you or after your money, and if you let her go back to Bristol I shall never speak to you again. Julian went to bed and did not sleep, which was becoming a habit. He knew what she was by then. He had made it his business to know. The way he made it his business to know the bearing capacity of clay. Her father had been a canal engineer, a good one, a Fenn of the Fens who cut the Marrow navigation, and he had taken his only daughter up on the works with him from the time she could hold a chain, and had taught her levelling and trigonometry and the reading of strata, and had never once told her she could not. And then he had died of a chill caught in a flooded cutting when she was 19, owing £800, and the world had explained to Hester Fenn with great thoroughness and total unanimity that everything she knew was worth nothing whatever, because of what she was. She had gone as a governess. She had lasted 11 months. She had gone into Pruitt's office as a copy clerk at £30 a year, and for 7 years she had written other men's reports in her own words and watched other men sign them, and had said nothing, and had gone home to a lodging in Bristol with 3 books in it and drawn cross-sections of sea walls by candlelight for no one at all. "Why did you speak, then?" he asked her, on the sea wall at Corun in February, with the wind coming off the water like a knife, in my library. 7 years of silence, madam, and then you contradict a duke in front of your employers over a figure on page 19. Why? Hester Fenn looked out at the grey water for a long time. "Because of the cottages," she said. "Because Roe was about to save you £1,000. And you were going to let him, and the whole thing would have gone forward without the gates, and it would have looked very well for 2 winters, my lord, and then there would have been a night with an easterly, and I would have read about it in a newspaper in Bristol." She pulled her shawl tighter. "I've been silent for 7 years, and it has cost me nothing but my pride. This would have cost 41 people their lives. That is not a thing one may be modest about. The wind came off the sea." "Miss Fenn," said Julian, "I called your work a man's work in front of a room, and you have never once thrown it back at me, and I wish to God you would." "Why?" "Because I cannot apologize for it properly until you do." She turned and looked up at him. Her nose was red with cold and her hair was a disaster, and there was mud to the knee of her habit. "My lord," she said, "you apologized for it within the hour, in front of the same room, by giving me the chair at your right hand and the commission in my name. It is the only apology I have ever received in my life that cost the man anything, and I have never wanted another." She looked back at the water. "But if it eases your conscience, it was a stupid thing to say, and you knew it was stupid while you were saying it, and I could see that you did, and that is chiefly why I did not hate you." Julian Carew stood on a sea wall in a February wind with his heart entirely out of his control. The tide came on the 11th of March. They had known it was coming, she had known it to the hour, and had said so in October, in a report nobody would read, and the basin at Redmire was 3 weeks from finished, and the sluice gates were hung, but the eastern bank was not yet turfed. And the wind went round to the east on the 9th and stayed there. He found her on the wall at midnight with a lantern. "Go back to the inn," he said. Miss Fenn." "The gates have never been worked," said Hester. She had to shout it over the wind. "Not once, my lord, not under load. If the sea comes and they jam, that basin fills and there is nowhere for the water to go, and it will take the eastern bank out and put 80 acres of tide through Marrow Dyke and into the village behind the wall, which is worse, do you understand me? That is worse than doing nothing at all. Someone must be on the gates, and I am the only person in England who has ever seen the drawings, 'cause I made them. The water came up out of the dark at 2 in the morning. It came the way she had said it would come, with the wind behind it. And it stood at Corun Point within 6 inches of the coping, within 2 of her figure, and he never afterwards forgot that, and it hit the new cut at Redmire and went into the basin like a held breath let go, and the gates screamed on their pins and shuddered and did not lift. She went down the bank. Julian shouted something he never afterwards remembered and went after her, and the 2 of them stood knee-deep and then thigh-deep in black water on a wooden platform in a gale, hauling on a rack and pinion that had jammed on a wedge of clay, with a lantern jerking on a pole and the sea coming through the cut at the speed of a running horse. It was Hester who found the wedge. She went down on her knees in the water and put her arm into the shoulder and felt for it and got it out with a crowbar. And Julian took her by the back of her habit and hauled her up bodily as the gate came free and the frame kicked, and the water went through into the basin at Redmire Flat with a roar like a train, and the level at Gull Reach. He was watching it. He had a man on the wall with a lantern and a staff stopped rising. It stopped rising. 80 acres of rushes went under the sea that night, and 11 cottages did not, and 41 people slept through the whole of it. She was shaking so badly she could not stand. He carried her up the bank and put her down inside the lee of the spoil heap and knelt in front of her and could not for a moment speak at all. "Aye, you may say it now," Hester Fenn said, through her teeth, stealthy, triumphant. "Go on, my lord. Say it was a man's work." Julian Carew took her face in his 2 hands. "It was your work," he said. "It was your work from the first page to the last. And every soul in this village is alive tonight, because a girl was taught to read a tide table by her father, and would not let 7 years of being told she was nothing make her hold her tongue in my library. His voice was not steady, and he did not care. And I will say so, madam, from now until I die, in every room I am put into, and if you tell me to be silent I shall not be. Do you understand me? She looked up at him soaked in the lantern light. I have never, she said unsteadily, understood anything better in my life. He did not kiss her on the spoil heap. He had thought about it for 6 weeks, and he had promised himself, on the night he first thought about it, that whatever happened between them would never happen while she was cold and frightened in his employment, because a duke who kisses a woman he is paying is not a lover, he is a landlord. So he wrapped her in his coat and put her on his horse, and walked her to the anchor, leading the animal, in the wind, at 3 in the morning, and knocked up the landlord, and stood in the yard while they carried hot water up the stairs, and then rode home and sat in his library in his wet clothes until the sun came up. Then he went to Bristol. He went to Bristol because Mr. Rowe had written to him, 3 days after the tide, to say that the firm was gratified by the outcome of the works, and that Mr. Rowe himself would be honoured to present the final report to the Board of Sewers and Commissioners at Wells in April, and that Miss Fenn's assistance had of course been considerable. Julian read the letter twice, very calmly, and then ordered his horses. He arrived at the office in Corn Street at 11 in the morning and did not sit down. Mr. Rowe, he said, I am going to say this once. In April I shall attend the Board of Sewers at Wells, and the report on the Hollingsea levels will be read there, and the person who wrote it will read it, aloud, in her own voice, to the commissioners. He laid his gloves on the desk. If you obstruct that in any particular, I will withdraw this firm's commission, I will publish the whole correspondence, and I will tell every landowner between here and the Wash exactly which of your employees stood thigh-deep in the sea on the 11th of March, and which of them was in Bristol asleep. Do you doubt that I will do it? Mr. Rowe did not doubt it. She read the report at Wells on the 9th of April, in a new pelisse that Lady Maud had bullied her into and that she detested, standing at the end of a table of 30 men who had come chiefly to see the spectacle. She read for 50 minutes. She did not falter once. When old Sir Weston Palgrave interrupted her, on the question of the blue clay, she put down her papers and answered him for 4 minutes without a note, and quoted his own survey of 1799 back at him, and pointed out, with perfect courtesy, where it was wrong and why, and what it had cost the parish of Marrow in flooded pasture every year since. And Sir Weston Palgrave, who was 80 and had not been contradicted since the reign of the last king, went a deep and dangerous purple and then, astonishingly, began to laugh. She said, By God, she has me. Gentlemen, the young woman is right, and I have been wrong for 14 years. Sit down, Hollingsea, and stop glaring at everybody. Nobody is going to eat her. They did not eat her. They elected her, in the end, the first consulting engineer to the board who had ever worn a bonnet. At £140 a year, and Julian Carew sat at the back of that room with his arms folded and his eyes stinging, and could not have told anyone, afterwards, one word of what was said in the last hour. He asked her in the churchyard at Gull Reach in June, because it was the only place he could think of where she would not be able to accuse him of theatre. She was looking at the 2 headstones, the 2 men lost in the year 11, whose names she had made him tell her on the first day and had never once mentioned since. Miss Fenn, he said, my lord, I have a difficulty, and I have decided to lay it before you as I would lay a set of levels, because you are the only person of my acquaintance who tells me the truth. He turned his hat over in his hands. I am in love with you. I have been since the 11th of January, when you told me to get out of your light. It has become extremely inconvenient. I would like to marry you. Hester Fenn stood absolutely still in the churchyard. There are objections, Julian went on, rather fast. I have made a list of them, because I did not trust myself to remember them under fire. 1. You will be a duchess, and duchesses are looked at, and half of England will say I was taken in by a clever adventuress, and the other half will say I have made a fool of myself, and they will say it in front of you. He drew breath. 2. You have a profession. You have fought for it for 7 years and paid for it with everything you had, and there is not a man in this country who would let his wife keep it. And, look at me, I have thought about that one for 4 months, and I have only one thing to say about it, and it is this. I would sooner shoot myself than take it from you, whatever else happens. If you refuse me flat and go back to Bristol tomorrow, you will still be consulting engineer to this estate, and I will still put your name on every page, because it is yours and it was never mine to give or to take. 3, said Hester Fenn. There is no 3. There is a 3, my lord. I am 26. I have £800 of my father's debts still outstanding. I have never in my life owned a gown that was not turned. I cannot dance. I cannot sing. I have opinions about drainage that will empty any drawing room in the west of England. And I have been told by everyone I have ever worked for that I am difficult. Her voice was shaking. That is 3. And 4 is that I have loved you since you pulled out that chair with your own hands in front of Mr. Rowe, and I have not said so, because you were paying my wages, and I would rather have died than be the woman who... Julian Carew crossed the churchyard in 3 strides. Then say it now, he said, when I am not paying your wages. Say it now, Hester, because I resigned the commission to Prewitts this morning and paid it out in full, and you are as free of me as any woman in England, and I have never in my life been so frightened of anything. Hester Fenn looked up at him, sharp-boned, unbeautiful, mud on her boots even in June, the finest mind in 3 counties, and said, I love you, and you are still standing in my light. He kissed her in the churchyard at Gull Reach, and the sea, which was a tenant now and not an enemy, went on breathing in and out behind the wall she had saved. They were married in September, in that same church. With 11 cottages worth of Gull Reach crammed into the pews and old Sir Weston Palgrave giving the bride away, because her father was under a flooded cutting in Staffordshire and, as Sir Weston observed, somebody had to do it, and he was the only man present she had ever publicly humiliated, which he considered a form of intimacy. Lady Maud wept. Mr. Rowe was not invited. The Duchess of Hollingsea did not stop working. She built the Coron Releasin in the year after her marriage and the Marrow Sluice the year after that, the right way round at last after 80 years. And she wrote the standard treatise on tidal defence in soft strata, which was published under the name H. Fenn Carew and went into 4 editions, and which is bound in blue calf in the library at Hollingsea Court, with an inscription on the flyleaf in a firm black hand, to my wife. It was right on page 19. They quarrelled for 41 years. They quarrelled about drains, spoil, the education of tenants, the price of lime, and whether it was necessary for a duchess to go out on a sea wall at midnight in a gale at the age of 62, on which last point Julian Carew lost as he lost most things, and went with her. And once a year on the 11th of March, they walked out together to Redmire Flat, where 80 acres of tide lay quiet inside its bank, and stood on the sea wall and looked at the water, and once late on when he was grey and she was grier. Julian said what he had never quite said in all those years. I told you it was a man's work. You did. Hester slid her hand into his. You were holding it at the time. I have thought about it every day for 40 years. I know, she said. I have thought about it too. Do you know what I have concluded, my love? She looked out at the level, patient water. That there is no such thing as a man's work. There is only work, and there are people who will stand in the cold at 2 in the morning and do it, and people who will not. She squeezed his hand. You came down that bank after me, Julian, in the dark, in the water, in your own coat with nothing to gain and no one watching but 41 people who were asleep. She smiled up him, sharp and unbeautiful and utterly beloved. You are the only man I ever met who did not need to be told twice. And the Duke of Hollingsea, who had once been the coldest man in 3 counties, stood on his own sea wall with his wife's hand in his and found that he had nothing whatever to say, which was how she generally left him, and how, to the very end of his life, he liked it best.